We are live, Your Honor.
Thank you. Good evening. The special meeting of the City Council will please come to order. Please join me for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Let the record show that all council members are present, except for Council Member Mike Bucci. This is an opportunity for us to take a preliminary look at the 2024-2026 biennial budget. It's a work session. Mr. Biennial.
Yes, good evening, Your Honor, and members of the council. As Your Honor so indicated, this is a budget work session to discuss the upcoming 2024 through 2026 biennial budget. Tonight we have a presentation from our finance director, Ms. Lee. She will provide the council with an update on economic trends as well as a financial update. And then following that, I'll provide an overview of the various department strategies and key objectives going through this budget cycle. Just a friendly reminder to the council that we want to keep this interactive, so feel free to stop us at any time, and we'd be happy to answer any questions that you may have. With that in mind, we turn it over to Ms. Lee, who will provide the first part of the presentation. Ms. Lee?
Thank you, City Manager Biennial. And since City Manager already pretty much covered the agenda, to save time, I'll go ahead and move forward if that's okay. So good evening, Honorable Mayor, members of the council. Again, tonight is our budget work session for our fiscal year 2025 and 2026 biennial budget. This here is an illustration of the biennial budget development process in the context of a 5-year forecast. The City of Newark operates on a fiscal year basis, which starts July 1st and ends June 30th. During this time of the year, in the even years, the city staff develops a biennial operating budget. The current budget cycle is, again, covering, sorry about that. Oh, sorry, it is too fancy. So the city, we're currently covering the budget cycles for fiscal year 25 and 26. So following adoption of the budget in May or June, a mid-year update is presented to the City Council based on new information. Later tonight in the regular meeting, you'll see that I do have a mid-year update for fiscal year 2024. And not only do we evaluate the current financial information, but we also evaluate future fiscal conditions using a 5-year financial forecast. And we use this tool to help identify future revenue and expenditure trends that may have an immediate or long-term influence on our policies, strategic goals, and community services.
What are some of the resources that you use, Ms. Lee, for the 5-year forecast?
For the 5-year forecast, I do look back 3 to 5 years, especially in the more recent years due to the pandemic. We always want to know, we always do know what the normal trends are, but because of the pandemic, the trends have not been the same. My other resources are sales tax and property tax consultants. I also follow a few of the economic experts, such as the UCLA, as well as the Beacon Economics, and then we stay in touch with our California Municipal Finance Officers listservs to kind of stay up with any impacts that are affecting the local municipalities from the state.
So you have some resources that you'll look at periodically to look at trends on the state and the federal government as they might impact local economics.
Yes, we actually do look at property tax and sales tax quarterly. And then for the global economics, we really kind of look at that maybe a few times a year. And then the state, we do get monthly newsletters that we do follow up on.
The reason I mention that is any budget, revenue, expenses is always going to be so fluid.
Right.
And the fact of the matter is we need to keep our fingers on the pulse of the economic situation locally, statewide, nationally, because at some point it's going to have an impact on local government as well. So, thank you for doing that research.
Thank you for reiterating that, Mayor. Okay, and so this here is a more detailed look of our typical budget cycle. And the budget development process, again, is typically about 9 months in duration. Our budget preparation really hasn't changed much, but as you had mentioned, it's a fluid process, and so we could be on target with the timeline, or we can defer from it a bit. As I think we've mentioned, we typically have our CIP updates in March, but for various reasons, it made more sense that we would offer it in April, which is still within the timeline. Okay, and then with everything that's compiled through this process, staff will put together a draft budget for council's review, and usually that we would provide that in another May work session, and then which then will eventually provide us the final adoption date, either late May or early June. And the economic trends. So global, national, and local issues, they all could have impacts on our forecast. The concerns in our last budget cycles that we've been monitoring were housing shortages. This is the prerequisite that affects our labor market, and this is also affects the migration rate to and from California. This is also a factor that causes Bay Area housing prices to continue to rise, especially with our limited inventory. Then we have our labor shortages and low workforce growth. The lack of workers to fill the available jobs is a concern, which constrains the companies from expanding. But in a later slide, you will see that the outlook is actually better from a year ago. And then we have pension. The discount rate updates and other non-economic assumption updates from CalPERS is always a concern, and we continuously monitor that. Lastly, we have the geopolitical tensions that contribute to the uncertainty of the global economic environment, and that can influence the investment decisions and the trade flows, as well as the economic growth prospects for the US economy. And that, of course, can trickle down to the local economy as well. So all of these concerns continue into our current budget.
As we look at economic trends, the state is looking at a budget deficit from anywhere from 38 plus billion up to possibly 70-something billion dollars. I know that's certainly going to impact schools because they rely heavily on state revenues. What might be the impact, if any, on local governments like Newark as it may relate to the state's budget?
As of right now, Mayor, there's not immediate impacts that we see. There's still a lot of decisions to be made, and of course, it's an election year, so we will have more of that type of update when we come back to you in May.
Great.
Okay. So the California housing inventory shortage continues. Roughly 61,400 single-family homes were for sale in California as of October 2023, and only about 17,200 were sold. Sales of existing single-family homes in California fell 6.7% from a year ago. In Alameda County, approximately 1,500 single-family homes were available, and only about 615 were sold. And here in Newark, our inventory was 39, and 18 were sold in October. So the high interest rates have further exacerbated California's chronic housing shortage. And as homeowners are locked into the historically low mortgage rates, they're either unwilling or financially unable to sell.
I think there's another contributing factor other than just the high interest rates currently. You also have a situation where folks were able to lock into extremely low interest rates a few years ago.
Right.
So there's not maybe the impetus to maybe put my home on the market while I'm locked in at a 2.75 up to 3.25 interest rate. Would you agree that that may be a contributing factor as well?
Yes, that's absolutely correct. And that's why I did mention that they are financially unwilling as well. And those 0 to 2% interest rates, we will probably never see those again. Historically, if interest rates are between 5 to about 5.7, those are pretty good interest rates to be considered. And we are currently at 6 or 7%, which is much higher than what we're used to, but because we've been seeing 0 to 2.5% for maybe the past 3 years.
I'm an older homeowner in Newark. When we first bought our home in Newark back in 1983, we assumed a loan of 12.5%. And that's when you could assume someone else's loan. The interest rates at that time were in the neighborhood of 16%.
Wow.
So we were able to assume someone's loan. So you're right, I never envisioned today or even yesterday we'd ever see 5 or 6%. And where people believe that's a high rate, and it is high rate with the value of these homes being so high.
Right.
It certainly pales to 12.5% and 16% back in the day. Yes, Mr. Freitas, Councilmember.
Can you repeat the numbers about the California supply homes? You said was statewide was 57,000 houses available.
Oh, yes. So these are
gen-
single-family homes. So statewide is 61,400
Statewide.
that were available as inventory.
Available, and was only sold like 6,000?
Only about 17,200 were actually sold.
Oh, is it like 33% or so? So, wow.
Yeah, and it's actually a year-over-year decrease. So which means every year for the past 3 years, we've been having less and less inventory, and then of course, therefore, less and less sales. But on my next slide, you'll see that this low inventory actually spikes up the cost of the home prices. So
Not long ago, the governor of California mentioned California was short 1 million houses throughout. 1 million houses. Can you imagine with 57,000 how short we'll be throughout?
we have a long ways to go. And I just want to clarify that these are resale inventories. It doesn't include new development. So a bit of a fun fact is actually because we have low resale inventory, it's actually pushing a lot of buyers going towards new inventory, which actually is a good thing for our assessed valuations. A lot of these newer homes could add much higher assessed valuations to our property tax roll.
Thank you.
Okay, so on this slide, what I'm showing is the supply and demand disparity that's driving up the cost. And at a regional level, sales transactions have decreased, but home prices in all major regions have increased significantly. So after 9 straight months of year-over-year declines, stretching all the way back to October 2022, the median sale price for an existing single-family home in California finally returned to growth in July of 2023. So it's been decreasing, and then in July of 2023, it started rising about 1.3%. Since then, the price growth has significantly accelerated. It's now reaching about 7.6% year over year as of October 2023. And this was one of the largest year over year gains in more than a year. October was the most recent month of data that was available. For California's median home price amount, that is at about $843,000. Alameda County median is at about $1.1 million, and Newark's median sales price is at $1.2 million. That's just slightly higher than the counties. So the positive year-over-year growth is expected to persist through the remainder of this year. And of course, the housing supply is expected to remain tight. Currently, home prices, I think I've mentioned, significantly increased, about 38.5% above the pre-pandemic peak, which was in February of 2022, and 1.6% below the pandemic peak in March of 2022. But economic experts are anticipating that home prices will surpass the pandemic peak by the end of this year. So unemployment, during the peak of California's labor market in July of 2022, there were roughly about 2 job openings for every unemployed worker. However, since then, the number of job openings and job seekers has converged. In September of 2023, there were an estimate of 911,000 job openings and 913,000 job seekers, yielding a ratio of approximately 1 job opening for every unemployed person now. The cooling labor market is a lagged response to the interest rate hikes during the past year, during the past year and a half. The cooling of the market also gave the Fed's room to pause further interest rate increases. So how it typically unfolds is that interest rates would increase, then borrowing cost becomes more expensive, and then economic activity slows down a business, and they reduce their investments, and therefore they are more cautious about expansion, and therefore less jobs.
It'd be interesting to see a chart accompany the unemployment situation with the increase in income over that same period of time, because many businesses have had to raise
Right.
pay to attract employees, and we've done that at the state level as well in terms of the minimum wage. So it would be interesting to see the growth of wages over that period of time as well, because you would almost anticipate that the growth in wages would then subsequently reduce the number of jobs for those who are looking for jobs, but that hasn't been the case.
That actually has been the case,
What has?
and I will look at adding that in my May presentation.
Okay.
Thank you. So in January 2024, the consumer price index was up 3.1% year over year, still higher than the Fed's preferred rate of 2%, which is the reason why the Fed's kept rates as where they've been since July of 2023. So over the past 18 months, the predictions regarding the future of the US economy has really varied considerably. Depending on which news you're following, they'll have really pendulum expectations of the market and what the Feds will eventually do with the rate increases. So the latest predictions does say that inflation will continue to decrease throughout 2024, prompting the Federal Reserve to cut the rates in the later half of 2024. So initially, they were thinking of cutting the rates this March, and then some were saying it'll probably be pushed back to June, but now it's, there's more and more economists that are agreeing that it's probably much later in the year, so probably November.
As we look at inflationary data, oftentimes they'll look at core inflation versus total inflation, and they'll say if we take out these items, and it could be energy, I can't recall what those are.
Food and
that-
energy,
food
yes.
That gets us to a certain point.
Right.
You know, I'm only speaking on behalf of consumers in our city of Newark today. Just if you go shopping, you don't see a low inflationary rate. You know, a box of cereal that might have cost you, $2, $3 several years ago is now $6 or $7. So it's always hard for consumers to reconcile the inflationary rate when they're grocery shopping. Any thoughts or comments on that idea?
Yes, and it's interesting that you brought that up, Mayor, because the CPI rate is, I wouldn't say complex, but there, like you said, there's a big basket and there's a lot of items that go into that basket. And especially with food, there's a lot of things that an everyday person would buy. And so they do have this exercise where they look at the items that a household typically would buy, and it's weighted. So you'll see that part of the food inflation, that what's weighted higher is towards probably milk or cereal versus maybe alcohol, because that's less purchased by households. And so they do that exercise. But when we're speaking on these everyday terms, we don't speak on the same terms, and so it is difficult for like a household to say, yeah, you're 3.1%. That's not what I'm feeling, because I'm feeling a 50% increase in my box of cereal or carton of milk. So So yeah, that is interesting.
And plus, we're seeing a significant increase in energy costs. And that's my concern as a council member mayor is that, you know, we have a lot of residents in our city that are low income. And when you see high food prices and now on top of that, you're starting to see high home energy costs, that's worrisome to me.
Right, and I think that is why they do offer the core, which takes out the highly volatile items such as food and energy, because those do change very frequently. Okay, and this slide is CalPERS update. So the Asset Liability Management, or ALM process, is a 4-year cycle review that CalPERS does on the investment portfolio and retirement plan liabilities. And this is conducted by the CalPERS Board of Administration. So the goal of this is to balance the expected cost of future pension payments with expected future investment returns. So in 2021, the 21.3% investment return triggered this funding risk mitigation policy, which then reduced the discount rate from 7% to 6.8%. The investment returns fluctuates and can be seen with the 2022 negative 7.5% return. And then in fiscal year 2023, which then pendulum back to a 5.8%. So in the most recent CalPERS March 2024 mid-cycle review, the good news that came out of it is that we're not expecting any changes of actuarial assumptions and no changes to the discount rate. And I just wanted to just briefly mention that lowering the discount rate essentially increases the present value of future pension liabilities. And so by lowering this discount rate, CalPERS is aiming to reflect a more conservative estimate of future investment returns, which in turn help better align the pension assets with their liabilities. But of course, that's higher cost to us as a city. Okay, this slide highlights Council's proactive actions towards managing pension cost. In fiscal year 2021, $10 million additional discretionary payment, or ADP, for the safety plan was issued, along with the year's investment gains, and that had the effect of bumping up our funding ratio from 64.4% to 78.1%. But then the risk mitigation policy that triggered the reduction of our discount rate from 7% to the 6.8%, that had actually changed our funding ratio and then bumped it back down. So it was kind of, we went up and then we went down. But without the $10 million additional payment, the drop when they lowered the discount rate, our funding ratio would have been much lower. Any questions so far?
You mentioned it came down from 76, 77, down. What did it come down to?
So as of the most recent CalPERS valuation report, our funding ratio now for the safety plan sits at 67.3.
Okay. And where would you be comfortable for us to be sitting? I know 90% would be great, 80% would be, where would you be comfortable with us being? 72%, 73%?
I tend to like the 75%, but I've been pretty happy that we were able to reach the 78. I was hoping we would be able to keep it at about 75. Yeah. So on the miscellaneous plan, in the following year, in June 2022, we made a $5 million ADP. And fortunately, this was coupled with the loss of investment return in that same year. And at the time, we were reflecting a funding ratio of 66.8%. And again, without these two ADPs, the city's funding ratios would have been much lower.
And that's the key I want people to come away with. But for those down payments, in essence, an additional payment to our principal balance, it would have been a lot worse.
Yes.
So, we had the foresight to recognize that our goal should always be to pay, when we have extra money, to pay this debt. And
Right.
so I think the proactive approach that we've taken maybe didn't get us the results that we wanted over time, but it certainly made the situation much better than it would have been otherwise.
Right. We're incrementally attaining, our maintaining the cost. So staff, as you can see here in spring of 2024, staff would like to prepare a recommendation that, or will be presenting to council on a later date to discuss the funding of a Section 115 trust, and we'll have further discussion whether an additional discretionary payment, otherwise known as the ADP, would be necessary.
Do you have a thought at this point as to how much funds you want to put into the Section 115?
Yes, actually, as part of the mid-year, staff had proposed $12 million, and that's mainly because we do have $12.4 million in our pension OPEB reserve fund. And if we're able to convert that into a Section 115, we can get a much higher investment return on those funds.
And you'll have more detail on that in the May budget? Excellent.
Oh, actually, we'll have more detail when we bring that to council as a separate item.
Okay, excellent.
Yes. Okay, and this is just another slide showing that these are all the cost containment strategies that are available. And the city of Newark has, again, really been proactive, and all the ones that we have a check mark next to are the ones that we've implemented. And of course, the one that is missing the check mark is what we will be proposing. And the last one, the restructuring of the remaining UAL, that's currently not recommended by our financial advisors, but we will continue to monitor that.
And I'm sorry, just for our listening audience, what is UAL?
Oh, unfunded actuarial liability.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, the financial update. So this slide shows our fiscal year 2024 year-end projection. The projected year-end general fund revenues are at $80.6 million, and projected expenditures are at $78.8 million. We are estimating a surplus of $1.8 million before transfers and a modest $200,000 surplus after transfers and one-time payments. So the notable transfers include a transfer in of $100,000 from state funds that were secured by Canson Chu for the purchase of the police analytics software. And then there's a $5.3 million transfer in from the ARPA funds for eligible ARPA expenditures as proposed in our ARPA funding plan adopted by council. And then these transfers are actually covered under the revenue replacement category of eligible cost. And I also show the $12 million from the pension OPEB reserve fund to establish a planned Section 115 trust. And this trust is dedicated to pre-funding employer contributions for the city's defined benefit pension plan and also to pay down the unfunded pension liability. Before making this transfer, staff will present this item to council at a separate meeting. And then the transfer out of $7 million from the general fund is allocated to address priority maintenance needs for buildings as identified in the facilities master plan. And then the last item there, the $12 million, that's just a one-time initial payment to the third-party administrator for establishing the Section 115 trust. So it comes in as a transfer in up top, and then we send the money out when we're ready to establish the trust fund, or the Section 115 trust.
Yes, Councilmember Freitas.
On the revenue sources, two questions. The Measure GG, the actual for 2023, it's 8.2, and the projection is 7.3, $500,000 minus. What's the?
Oh, well, as I mentioned, it's quite volatile, and then also there's a lot of reporting corrections that happens every quarter as CDTFA reconciles their receipts, and so those are just mainly reporting errors. We've also had significant taxpayers that have come into the city, and then unfortunately we also have significant taxpayers that also left the city.
Okay.
Yeah, and my apologies, for confidential purposes, I cannot disclose any further details about these taxpayers.
Understood. Now, the follow-up question, other taxes, it's going from 2.2, 2.5 to 2.0 projections too, so on the revenue sources. The sixth line from the top, other taxes.
Oh, other taxes. Yes. Other taxes includes business license as well as property transfer tax. Business license are typically pretty consistent, and our business license have stayed in line with our past history, so that's good. It means that we haven't lost many businesses in the city. What is fluctuating is the property transfer tax, and of course that speaks back to the resale transactions that are happening. So we're not able to have as many home transaction resales. So therefore, those amounts have decreased.
Thank you, Your Honor.
When I was in San Jose, and I'm going back a number of years when I was in finance, I thought there was an exception to a transfer between family members on property. Is that an exception here in Newark where you can transfer your real estate to a family member and avoid the transfer tax?
Well, that's actually a statewide, and I believe the newer proposition is Proposition 19. And I can't speak to exactly how the ins and out of that proposition works off the top of my head, but there is such
Exceptions?
exemptions,
Okay.
yes.
Thank you.
Okay, so the projected general fund revenues is 80.6 million, and this is an increase of 9 million or 13% above the current budget and 700,000 or 1% above prior fiscal year. So this does not include any transfers or one-time payments. The current budget was updated as part of the mid-year budget report, bringing the current budget more in line with current economic trends. The mid-year report is provided to council in tonight's regular agenda packet. The general fund's largest revenue source is property tax, and it is estimated at 30.5 million and is performing 1.6 million or 5.5% higher than current budget, with expected growth of 1.9 million or 6.6% over the prior fiscal year. And in the mid-year report, the property tax current budget was proposed to be increased by 1.6 million. And because the current amended budget, we had prepared that budget 2 years ago, and we were just coming out of the pandemic, and therefore that budget back then was much more conservative. But we've seen much more promising property tax, and therefore we have this mid-year process to make these adjustments or propose these adjustments.
And let's keep that in perspective. The property taxes that we were receiving in this city just a number of years ago was in the teens.
Yes.
And now we're looking at a projection of 30.5 million.
Right.
I don't remember the number per se, but I think it's probably double what it was just less than 10 years ago.
Yes, doubled in less than 10 years. That's correct.
Yeah, definitely.
So sales tax constitutes the general fund's second largest revenue source and is projected to be a total of 22.5 million. 15.2 of that is the Bradley Burns, and 7.3 of that is Measure GG, which is a total of 3.1 million or 12% less than last fiscal year, and 1.5 or 7% higher than the current budget. And the mid-year increase proposes sales tax budget to be updated by 1.5 million. And our transient occupancy tax, while business and leisure travel continues to improve after the pandemic, the projected fiscal year 2024 TOT revenue is $5.3 million, which is still under the pre-pandemic levels. In the mid-year, we've proposed to increase the TOT revenue by $1.4 million. And then the utility users tax, we're projecting a $4.4 million revenue for fiscal year 2024. This is slightly higher than the prior fiscal year, but 33.4% over current budget. And then this is based on current receipts to date, and this is also capturing video service and electric rate increases. So the mid-year, we are proposing to increase the UUT by $1.1 million. And then in the licenses, permits, and fees category, we include franchise fees, construction permits, building permits, animal license, and recreation fees. So fiscal year 2024 revenues are projected to be modestly higher than the current budget and in line with fiscal year 2023 results of $10.5 million. Franchise fees receipts are trending favorably compared to the budget and to the prior year. On the downside, construction and building permit revenues, which can be explained by the drop of number of permits issued to date between fiscal year 2024 and fiscal year 2023. Just to note that the construction sector is an interest-sensitive sector, and so because of high interest rates, it makes sense that our construction permits have decreased a bit. On the positive side, our recreation fees to date are reflecting increases compared to both the budget and the prior fiscal year, as increased post-pandemic activities are driving revenue-generated activities in the Silliman Aquatic Center, the licensed childcare, and the general recreation services. And then our investment income was the largest increase from the prior year. Taking advantage of the higher interest rates and with the updated investment policy, the city was able to invest more funds in the higher yielding California Asset Management Program, also known as CAMP, which is very similar to the Local Agency Investment Fund, also known as LAIF. Both of these funds are local government investment pools and are established by the state and local government entities so that public entities can pool their funds for these investments. CAMP's rate was at 5.5%, and LAIF's rate was at 3.9% when I last checked, which was about a few weeks ago.
And do we lock those in for a staggered period of time, certain monies over a staggered period of time, so we don't expose ourselves to a significant amount of our investments in one period?
Yes, and it's actually very liquid, so we actually can pull the funds out every month if we wanted to. And what was really interesting this time around is, I don't want to get too much into this technically, but the inverted yield curve, we actually were getting higher interest rates for more liquid funds, whereas everyone's used to, if you lock in money for a longer term, that's when you typically would get higher interest rates. But this year, or this year and a half, that wasn't the case. And even like the much shorter term, locking in a 3-month term with CAMP, we were getting higher rates than if we were to lock in that money at 6 months or 1 year with a bank.
Okay.
Yeah.
Councilmember Freitas?
Mr. Benoon, how many more years do we have left on the utility users tax?
I believe that is set to sunset in calendar year 2029.
The Newark voters passing that for 8 years the last time, right? So it was 22.
They extended it for 9 years.
For 9 years, so
Yes.
2029. Okay, thank you. Thank you, Ron.
Let me ask a follow-up on that question, Mr. Benoon. I know we've given some thought at going to the voters for an increase in the TOT tax. I would imagine it would be really complicated to go back to the voters at the same time and see if they'd be willing to extend the utility users tax. Is that something that would probably be better served waiting until 2029 to have that conversation?
Yes, as we get closer to that expiration date, that would have a tendency to confuse voters on the issues.
Should have kept it without a date.
So this is the pie chart that illustrates the city's revenue sources, and I'll speak briefly only about the significant revenue sources. Property tax is the city's largest revenue source, representing 38% of general funds revenues. The city's second most significant revenue is sales tax, which is comprised of two components, the Bradley-Burns distribution, which is 19% of the pie, and Measure GG, the half-cent sales tax approved by voters in November of 2016, and that accounts for 9%. Together, they represent 28% of total general fund revenues. Currently, the city's third primary revenue source is our transient occupancy tax, the TOT, and that's followed by the UUT, which was approved by voters in November of 2020 to continue for 9 years. Okay, and then collectively, the licenses, permits, and fees accounts for 13% of the total revenues. And again, that includes franchise fees, buildings, construction permits, and recreation program fees. It's just the total revenues amount again.
Can you go back and give me illustration of the 9% of others, others, 9%, just one example.
Oh, the 9% of others, that includes our other taxes as well as our investment earnings.
Okay, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. Okay, and this is our general fund expenditures by category. The projected expenditures is $78.8 million and is $1.1 million or 1% above the current budget. And again, this does not include one-time payments or transfers. The personnel category reflects a general salary increase of 3% with a vacancy factor of 7% and includes overtime and leave cash outs. The retirement costs are budgeted using the projected increases provided by CalPERS. In the non-personnel category, this is comprised of materials, supplies, employee training, and professional and contractual services. The increase is mainly due to increased consulting and professional services, which increased about $1.4 million. And a lot of the significant increases are in the IT, cybersecurity, HR, economic development, and public works. Other expenditures in the non-personnel categories include software licenses, subscriptions, which also increased about $500,000, and then we also have employee recruitment and retention costs that went up about $112,000.
Was the non-personal expenditures kind of where you thought it would be? I mean, you showed the amended budget about 19.3, projection 20.8, and I've heard your explanation as to where all those monies are going, but it's a significant increase over the actual from 2023. Where we are currently, is that where you would anticipate over the next few years we're going to kind of be in that ballpark? Or do you see it slightly increasing, decreasing, or any way to kind of give a projection on that?
I actually would think that we might decrease a little bit. Another reason for this significant increase is because we have a wonderful new IT team now, and then we have a lot of cybersecurity implementations, and so we have been incrementally been trying to achieve a baseline budget, and so we're really close. These numbers are based off of encumbrances. And a lot of times what we do find is for different reasons, whether it's timing or the resource of staff, we may not use up all of these encumbrances, and then we start closing out encumbrances sometime in early May to prepare for the year end. And so I do expect these to come down a little bit.
Thank you. Councilmember?
I want to touch on that cybersecurity and IT. How much have other cities had to pay out to clean up the mess that somebody else did because they didn't pay for their cybersecurity?
Too much more than
Yeah.
what we're looking at, yes.
You don't know.
And that's just monetary.
Yeah.
That doesn't include everything else.
That's what we're afraid of.
To the Alameda County Fire Services, looks like the next 3 projected years and fiscal years, we have been thanks to Mr. Benoon, very consistent, I guess, with about 10% increases. So, yeah, like the former mayor used to say, because it's the service increasing, but the pay, it's the negotiations about 10%. So, kudos to everyone involved on this negotiations. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, and yes, so the last part I was mentioning is that we do, the proposed budget also includes the ACFD fire contract services, which currently a 5% year-over-year increase is known. Okay, this pie chart shows our expenditure categories. Personnel expenditures is the largest category at 52% of our budget, which is consistent with all other cities. Personnel expenditures include salaries, benefits, and pension. Non-personnel expenditures, again, includes materials, supplies, services, and that covers about 26% of our budget. And then the Alameda County Fire Department contract is about 17% of our budget, and the remaining 6% is the Civic Center debt service. So then this is an overview of our 5-year forecast based on past, current, and projected financial conditions. The forecast has been updated to provide actual activity for fiscal year 2023, the projections for fiscal year 2024, and estimates for fiscal year 25 through fiscal year 2029. Property tax are projected to grow at an average of 5.3% for the next 5 years, and this is an average. Sales tax is more sensitive to economic factors, and we are projecting a moderate growth of 3% in the out years. And these amounts do take into effect of the opening of Costco. The transient occupancy tax, we're projecting 3% year-over-year growth for the out years. The UUT increases are projected at 3.6% for fiscal year 2025 and 2026, and then 2% for fiscal years 2027 through 2029. All the other revenues are projecting at an approximately 2% growth factor. We did reduce our investment earnings from $3.5 million in 2024 to an average of $1.3 million to be conservative in the out years. Economists are expecting mild growth with no recession in the next year, unless there's a significant event that would occur and that would cause ripple effects to the local economy. Any economic slowdown or adverse economic event would significantly change our forecast, which is why this forecast is updated throughout the year, and our forecast is also conservative to address any possible downturns in the future. And bearing a recession, the local governments still have to contend with a wide range of fiscal challenges. So again, the city will continue to take a cautionary approach to our revenue forecasting. And then for our expenditure categories, employee memorandums of understanding expires in June of 2025. So labor costs included in this budget does not take into account any possible future costs associated with future agreements. The personnel expenditures for fiscal year 2025 and beyond take into account a 3% cost of living adjustment, 7% vacancy factor, current levels of pay for the filled positions, and then for vacant positions, we budget at top step with benefits at employee +1 and with the PEPA pension rates. Tongue twister. Non-personnel expenditures are forecasted with the average increase of 5.8%, except for the fire contract, which is projected at increases of 5% annually. And this includes the non-personnel expenditures also includes what we call internal service allocations to other departments, and this increased about $2.3 million between 2025 and 2024, fiscal year 2025 and 2024. This includes a 3% increase to building maintenance for fiscal year 2027, fiscal year 2028, as well as fiscal year 2029. And so operating results before the transfers reflect surpluses, and net of transfers results in slight deficits beginning in fiscal year 2026. The transfers for the out years includes a residual $100,000 from the state funds secured by Canson Chu, the transfer in of the remaining ARPA funds to the general fund for eligible expenditures, and then the transfer out beginning in 2025. What that reflects is setting aside the residual balance of the Measure GG funds after we pay debt service. The economy is still very unpredictable. As such, the city will continue to forecast conservatively but realistically. Okay, so this is the historical of our property tax revenue source. Again, the property tax we are estimating to be at $30.5 million, and this is performing much higher than the amended budget. The property tax revenue is generally the most stable source of our revenues due to a combination of higher assessed valuations on the properties, as well as new inventory due to our new constructions. What we're showing is the assessed value every year may only be increased by the maximum 2% CPI. This year, the CPI for our property taxes is at 2%. I think we only had 1 year where the CPI was much lower, and that was the year of the pandemic. I think it was at like 1.36%. The information provided by the Alameda County Assessor indicates that the assessed value for fiscal year 2024 tax roll for Newark had increased a net 10.7%, and that was one of the highest in the Alameda County. That huge increase was coupled with the unsecured, a large unsecured assessed valuation, as well as increase in our new constructions that was added to our roll. Property tax receipts typically lag by 12 to 18 months, and the property tax distributions from the county are largely received in December, March, and April. So the fiscal year 2024 values were set as of January 1st of 2023, and based on sales and new constructions during the calendar year of 2023. Okay, and this is the historical of our sales tax. We continue to receive revenues from Measure GG, the half-cent sales tax, as was approved by voters in 2016. And this revenue continues to come in at higher than anticipated levels.
2 questions. Go back to the previous slide. I had not heard that term Bradley Burns. I'm guessing what that is that's our percentage locally of the sales tax collected by the state?
It's 1%.
That's what Bradley
allocation.
Burns means?
Yes, and that's usually the purchases that are at the stores, the brick and mortars, whereas some of the other purchases, like the online ones, those actually go into a pooled allocation. So
Go into what?
the pool allocations.
Okay.
And that has a different calculation methodology where then it's allocated to us a little bit differently.
Is it more favorable for me to have my shoppers buy online, or is it better for them to go into the store?
It's definitely better for shoppers to shop Newark and
there you go.
in person.
Geez, I walked right into that one, didn't I?
Yes.
Where have I been all these years?
Thank you for asking that, Mayor.
We continue to tell our residents how our projections are conservative in nature because we want to be good stewards of our revenues and our expenses. And if you go back to the previous chart, one thing I think it would be helpful as we give projections and look back historically on this chart here, for example, where we received $20.7 billion in property taxes, It'd be interesting to see a side chart or sidebar next to that. What was it that we predicted the property tax would be for that fiscal year? So because I would imagine as we're looking at it conservatively, the amount of revenue that we're generating in property taxes would be slightly higher maybe than, or slightly lower than where we projected it would be versus a significant change. I think that would certainly cement the story that we are looking at these things conservatively. We're not wildly guessing where we think the revenues will be. What are your thoughts on something like that?
Yes, I can definitely add that. I wouldn't call it a trend line, but the budgeted line. What I would add is that when we do our property tax projections, there are 3 areas where we're pretty sure that we're really close to what the estimate would be, and that's usually the secured property taxes. There's something where we call the unitary assessment that comes to us, and that's usually a flat amount that we get. And then, of course, there are admin fees. What does fluctuate is the unsecured rolls, but a lot of times if we know what's happening in the city, we tend to have like a median number that we would work with our sales tax consultant on. And so we would kind of compare what our thoughts are with what they actually have in their database, and then we would a lot of times be in the middle. So again, the other things that would throw our actuals off from our projections would be any recaptures of the Prop 8 and any delayed payments of property taxes, and those usually are due to timing. And so those are things that we wouldn't know about, and we might get a pleasant surprise in our numbers for those years.
Yeah, and I wouldn't want to show that side by side if there's so many variables that could make that figure look out of balance from where we thought it would be. But as we do our budgets and we look at our revenues and expenditures, if you see a trend that when you have all that data, that kind of substantiates where we thought we would be, I think that would be important to at least verbally let the council know we're kind of where we thought we would be, give or take X,
Okay, yes, I will look into that. Thank you, Mayor.
Councilmember Freitas?
Yes, Your Honor. Can I go back one slide, slide number 20, about the pension now payable debt. On the fiscal or the projection for 2024, we have 12 million contribution, but the following year, and we are in the positive, we still have 0.20. But the following years, we not contribute for the projections, and we are at minus. The explanation for this, or we capper off the.
Yes. So, Councilmember Freitas, the transfer ins, what we do is we take the net operating results before transfers and we add in the transfers in, and then all the transfers out is actually should be deducted. So that really is a negative amount. So we're taking the 1.8 million plus the 17.4 million, and then we subtract out the 7 million that we're transferring out to the capital fund, and then we subtract out the pension and ADP contribution because we're making a payment out to that. So therefore, if you're looking at fiscal year 2026, you take the 2.4, we add in the 100,000, and then we subtract out the 2.9 because that's a transfer out.
Okay.
But that doesn't factor in, obviously, new revenues that we may receive in those years. For example, if the voters are kind enough to approve an increase in the TOT, things of that nature, that's not reflected here.
No, and that's not reflected there. And where we get that 2.9 amount is I'm projecting, sorry, I'm a little, so I'm projecting 7.7 million for our Measure GG, but I'm expecting to pay out the 4.8 for debt services, and therefore I have this 2.9 that's residual. And what I'm saying is we're transferring that out in a Measure GG side fund, not side fund, but the Measure GG fund. So that's building up for, therefore we have the Measure GG excess funds, and that's what we would look at for any capital needs.
But you don't have a line item for that, do you, Ms. Lee, in terms of the excess Measure GG funds that we're holding for possible additional facility improvements, whatever the case may be? We're not seeing that income here, are we?
That's what I'm showing in the 2.9.
Oh, that's in the 2.9?
Yes,
Okay.
and then in our financials, you'll see that we actually have a line that earmarks that fund balance
Okay.
from the Measure GG funds that we've been collecting and are in excess of the debt service payments for all these years.
Councilmember Jorgens?
Yeah, going back to the slide 21, the property tax slide, one thing that would be interesting for me to see is what percent of that increase, both past and what we're projecting, is going to be based on new build housing rather than increase in property taxes from existing housing stock. Just when we look at new projects, kind of knowing the budgetary impact there. I don't know if it's possible to pull that out, but if it is, it would be interesting for me.
Yeah, we don't have like a real time number for the new constructions that actually come onto the roll. What we do have is from our property tax consultants is based off of historical data, the average of new construction that adds to our roll, and then we can decide whether we think, it really depends on the development of the construction, right? If they're on time and those are going to be completed and sold on time, then of course those will come onto our roll earlier. If there's some kind of delay, those will show up later. And so those are the things that would affect when those new constructions amount will show up on our tax roll. And so what we do is once we have an average annually based off historical, we can decide, like from the community development department, if they tell me, oh, you know, we have these two projects that there might be delays or they're on time, then we would either take either 25% or 30%. It just depends. So we would adjust our percentage that we're adding to our property tax projections. Mm-hmm. Okay, and so this is the TOT historical, and council recently had a more detailed presentation last month. We are expecting our TOTs to grow at approximately 3% year over year. And then the utilities users tax, I covered a lot of that detail in the previous slides. Again, the tax rate is at 3.25%, and we are expecting a modest increase from fiscal year 2023. And what this increase is capturing is the video service and electric rate increases. And this brings me to my last slide. This is the fund balance and reserve slide. At the close of fiscal year 2023, the city was able to maintain its emergency and fiscal uncertainty reserves of $11.4 million and $10.7 million, respectively, at a combined amount of $22.1 million. The reserves are above the 30% minimum target of our audited general fund operating expenditures. And these are the reserves that can help the city mitigate our risk, respond to any financial challenges during economic downturns, emergencies, or cyclical deficits when annual expenditures exceed revenues. Excuse me. As you may recall, the fund balance and reserve policy was recently updated in June of 2023 to establish the minimum target at 30%. Prior to that, the goal was 25%. And it's been very fortunate that the city has been able to maintain this level. The pension OPEB reserve currently are at $12.4 million, largely increased during fiscal year 2023 in anticipation of funding a Section 115 trust. Salary savings also contributes to this increase and is the main vehicle for funding the pension and OPEB reserves on an annual basis. We anticipate drawing down on this reserve before the end of the fiscal year to address the city's pension obligations. Lastly, the equipment replacement reserve is currently at $6.2 million. The annual contributions are from the general fund support, or is supported by the general fund, and we anticipate in dipping into this reserve to pay for some deferred equipment maintenance. Okay, and that concludes my part of the presentation. Are there any questions that I can help answer?
Just on this last slide with the equipment replacement fund at 6.2 million, is that kind of where we want to be? Obviously we want more money there than need be, but are we comfortable with the 6.2 million there?
We are comfortable for now. We do have a technology master plan and a few other master plans that are in the works, and I do foresee us dipping into this, and we will have to reassess what our comfort level is, and would we phase in the spending down this fund balance.
As Mr. Benoon, as items come before the council and we start dipping into equipment replacement funds, things of that nature, it'd be helpful if staff included that we are dipping into that fund. It was 6.2 million on this date. We anticipate it will be this on this date. So the council has kind of a historical perspective as to where we are today, where we're going to be after we're dipping. So then we'll know it's an opportunity for us to look at putting more monies back in that account. Thank you.
Great, thank you. And the next section is the department priorities. And City Manager Benoon will be presenting this.
Yes, good evening, Your Honor, and members of the council. Before I begin, are there any other questions related to Ms. Lee's presentation?
No questions, Mr. Benoon, but just again, just an outstanding report. It was explained in such a way that it was very understandable. The presentation makes sense in terms of where we've been, where we're going. And I know a lot of work, Ms. Lee went into this report with help from your staff and the various departments. So just on behalf of my colleagues, just an outstanding report, and we really appreciate what we've done. And the conservative viewpoint that we take to our finances, because we don't know when that rainy day is going to come, as we just experienced the pandemic, and we were positioned better than most cities to address that situation. Good presentation. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
And I would just like to add and publicly acknowledge and thank Ms. Lee for her and her staff's efforts in the investment income side of revenue, and the council's decision in amending the investment policy, allowing us to move over to camp, produced was an extra $2 million, I believe.
Close to $3 million.
$3 million in investment income, and staff's very aggressive with switching those accounts. I get notices from the banks all the time, so I thank Ms. Lee and Ms. Del Rosario. I have no problem flooding my inbox with emails if it yields $3 million. No problem there, so thank you. As for the next part of the presentation, we're going to go over the draft department priorities. Each department discussed internally their goals and objectives for implementing council's directives for this upcoming budget cycle. We're going to go ahead and walk through each department's proposed priorities. We're going to begin with public safety, specifically the police department. And before I get into it again, council's more than welcome to stop me at any point and ask me any question. The police department's comprised, for the purposes of our budget and for the purposes of this presentation, two primary divisions. One is the operations side and one is support services. So we're going to begin with operations. One of the first goals here is to increase focus on training of new officers and staff development. We have a lot of young new officers. We need to make sure that they are appropriately trained. We also need to be mindful that the legal landscape involving what is the appropriate use of force and police, how police effectively do their job, that continues to change. And we want to make sure that our officers are well-versed in the continuing changing case law. And so that's what the first bullet point there is. Well, they're not bullet points, first column. Second one is the resource deployment. I'd like to publicly acknowledge and thank our police chief for championing the hiring of the city's first ever crime analyst. That was done a year or so ago. We have a very competent, very intelligent crime analyst who is working with our police department to make sure that we have an intelligence-led policing, where the officers are aware of the recent crime trends, the hot spots, and that they can go ahead and be proactive in preventing our crime. So we want to be able to address those proactively. And we also thank and acknowledge the council for their support in the various law enforcement technology that the council has approved, and we'll be certainly utilizing that to our advantage as well. I also note that it's not just our local crime that we need to analyze, but also regional crime. The crime analyst does look at crime trends continuing throughout the Bay Area, and we want to make sure that those trends do not trickle into the city of Newark. So we want to take a proactive stance in regards to that. Third column, responsive to quality of life concerns such as inoperable vehicles and blight. We do have 1.5 vehicle abatement officers who work in that regard. And the last column, I'm going to go ahead and spend a little bit of time discussing, and this is the implementation of a $986,000 grant that the city received from the state of California in regards to addressing automobile and catalytic converter thefts. A lot of work went into developing that grant proposal. I'm very thankful, I'm sure the community is as well, of all those efforts in securing those funds. Now we're at the point where we want to implement those funds, and we'll be spending a fair amount of time in this upcoming biennial budget to do that. We do have an MOU with Fremont Ford for catalytic converter identification etching, and we've already started with that. We've been working with the Mission Valley ROP. We hope to have a delivery in early May for mobile speed trailers. Hopefully some community pole camera trailers will be delivered the next 6 weeks. We're working with Flock safety cameras to install some new ALPR mobile cameras. We contracted with Cal State East Bay, and they're going to go ahead and review the use of those funds, looking at metrics to ensure that those funds are effectively used. Next slide, the other side of the police department, we have our support services side. First column, enhancing community engagement. Third, renewed partnerships, youth programs, community events, and volunteers. We also have continued recruitment commitment focused through focused candidate engagement by the recruitment sergeant. I'm going to go ahead and pause here and acknowledge and thank Sergeant Tony Heckman. He's a longstanding Newark police officer. He's been with us for many, many years. And he was recently assigned, maybe not so recently, but he was assigned to be the city's first recruitment sergeant. He's very active and engaged with those who are potentially considering law enforcement careers. I do have the pleasure of meeting new officers all the time and seeing them and coming to City Hall interviews, and I always nicely speak with them before their interviews. And they always talk about how awesome Sergeant Heckman is and how he's been a great point of entry to our police department. So I'm very thankful for his efforts. We're looking forward to continuing with that. We want to prioritize professional development and succession planning, including mentorship and opportunities for future leaders. As a big emphasis in our department. And then, of course, certainly last but not least, we want to ensure that our practices are consistent through our department policy and that we're compliant with all of the audits. That concludes our police department. I'm going to go over to Alameda County Fire, and then we'll pause at that time for some questions. First and foremost, we want to ensure that the firefighters respond to emergency services and that they do so in adherence with the city's existing agreement with ACFD. That agreement contains specific response times, and we want to continue to make sure that firefighters are responsive to those response times, and they've been meeting those response times recently. We have a fairly engaged emergency services coordinator. I thank the council for authorizing us to partner and collaborate with Union City in sharing that FTE. Mr. Richard Martinez is here with us somewhere in the audience. He's sitting in the back. He's been very active with our community, the Listos program, CERT, and we want to continue with that. PEP, that's Personal Emergency Preparedness. These are classes that ACFD and our Emergency Services Coordinator host. They speak with our residents to ensure that they have a plan that's put together should some sort of an emergency arise. For the next budget cycle, we're looking at reaching out to HOAs, apartment complexes, affordable housing places, school districts, that sort of thing. We've been very active in Listos, working in collaboration with the Promotoris Group, and we hope to continue that relationship going into this budget cycle. I'm going to take a pass on CERT, as our Assistant City Manager will speak to that later towards the end of the presentation. And then the last column, the city's CEMP, Comprehensive Emergency Management Plan. It was adopted in 2013, which God, time really flies by. It just feels like it was a few months ago we adopted that. But it is in need of a refresh and an update, and Mr. Martinez will assist us in leading us through that process throughout this budget cycle. That concludes ACFD and public safety in general. Perhaps we should pause here. I'd be happy to answer any questions that the council may have.
Questions? Nope. I just have two questions. On the vehicle abatement, Mr. Benoon, is that vehicle abatement focused solely on public property, or do they private property as well?
They do public property. Code enforcement, our community preservation unit, addresses inoperable vehicles on private property.
And the public property, complaint-based or proactive, or combination of both?
Combination depending on the available resources. Right now, we do have a vacancy in one of those 1.5 positions, so it might be a little bit more reactive, but when fully staffed, it'll be proactive.
And the work that Mr. Martinez is doing, and you mentioned the HOAs, how many neighborhood watch, not watch groups, what are they called? Watch groups, watch
Yeah, that's correct. Neighborhood Watch
How many
established.
neighborhood
Yeah.
watches do we have established in our city?
We probably have about 30, 3 dozen, 25. Okay.
And do we proactively then go out and meet with them they make the request, or do we come out and solicit our willingness to come out and meet with them on a periodic basis? Is it a combination of both? In that
We do have, well, I don't know about recently, but when we do have a community engagement manager, we do host regular neighborhood watch meetings with the captains, and they come in, they receive updates about what's going on in town. I believe we've done PEP trainings at those neighborhood watch meetings as well. If you need more information, I'd be happy to ask one of our command team members to come up.
No, I just want to make sure we're engaged with the neighborhood associations, for example, that, we're here, we're a resource for you. If you see a trend or just simply want some educational information, we're here for you. Here's a number to call. We're happy to come out and meet with you at your HOA. As long as I know that those services are available and provided, I'm comfortable with that.
Yeah, we have a fairly engaged National Night Out program, which I don't know, maybe I'm a little bit biased, but I feel that it's more engaged than other agencies.
Okay, thank you.
All right. For the next department, second largest department in the city is our Public Works Department. It consists of 4 divisions. We'll go ahead and begin with the Engineering Division. First column, support residential and commercial construction. Obviously, that continues to live here in Newark, and we want to address that. Second column, oversee construction of Central Avenue Railroad Overpass Project. Pleased to report that later this month, we should see some undergrounding construction take place. PG&E is working on their designs, nearing completion right now, and we hope that they will begin their utility relocation this fall. And hopefully we can begin construction of this overpass in the summer. Third column, exciting news. This is all about Thornton Avenue. So we have 2 Thornton Avenue projects, as well as the Old Town Streetscape project. So phase 1 of Thornton, this would rebuild the street from 880 all the way to Olive. And then we have, timeout, question?
I don't have to recuse?
There's no discussion, I'm just giving a brief update, yeah.
I've muted her microphone.
So phase 1 is 880 to Olive, Old Town is Olive to Ash, and then phase 2 of Thornton Avenue is Ash Street to Spruce. I am very pleased to report that many thanks to legislative lobbying efforts by both U.S. Senator Padilla as well as our local representative, Mr. Rokana, the city of Newark was able to secure $1 million towards phase 2. So very fabulous. He's just learned it over this weekend that President Biden signed that legislation in the law. And this is for this current fiscal year, so very exciting. We already received $2 million from the federal government with respect to phase 1. And then obviously, we received monies from the state of California in the Old Town Streetscape project. Many thanks to Assemblymember Lee. This project is in the design phase with respect to Old Town. We had a community engagement kickoff meeting. Was that last week? Time flies by. Yes, we had 55 engaged members of the public, ranging from business owners to residents to real estate brokers. So that's exciting news. It took place here in the library. These funds do require to be administered through Caltrans, so it will take some time for us to get the permits. But our goal is that all three of these projects, again, the goal may not necessarily bear out in reality, but the goal would be to realize economies of scale and have these all done at the same time. And hopefully, we will have construction begin during this budget cycle. That certainly is the goal. As for the fourth column, implement traffic improvement and roadway safety projects. We got our truck routes study that we're working on, and we have the active transportation plan. Mr. Imai and his staff came in and gave a brief presentation to the city's executive team. I'm pleased to report that ATP is moving along, and we hope to have something for council consumption in the near future. Very excited about that. And then, of course, we'll pursue outside funding for transportation projects, including federal state earmarks, and then RM3. And that looks like we may be able to secure some funds through that route, so we're very excited about that. Next division of our Public Works Department, building inspection. Want to continue to support construction activity within the community. We want to educate the community on building code updates. So building code continues to get updated. We're going to go ahead and update all of our forms, information on our website, make sure that we're communicating the appropriate information to the community. But our chief building official is also planning on meeting with local businesses to make sure they understand building codes in advance of what they want to do to help streamline the process and make it easier for everybody. And then, of course, we want to implement software programs to streamline development permitting. That's something we're always looking to do, and we're excited about that for this biennial budget cycle. That's building inspection, and then we turn to maintenance. So we do have a lot of maintenance needs in the city: parks, landscaping, streets, buildings, vehicles, equipment. So they will continue to do that. One exciting thing is the city's urban forest. The city does not have an urban forest master plan, and we're looking to create our very own and first ever urban forest master plan. So we're excited about that. We hope to issue a request for proposals in the next 60 to 90 days. We want to complete some maintenance needs that are identified in the facilities master plan. That was the laundry list of $75 million worth of needs that were identified. We do not want to accomplish all of those in the next budget cycle. That's over the next 20 years. But we do want to complete those that are high priority, and that'll be something that will be vetted through the CIP process. One thing that we probably need to add to the budget, and we'll be certainly looking at that very carefully when we come back to the council in May, is providing some additional funds for increased project management. We do have a lot of landscaping and building projects that we want to be able to address, and there may be a need for some additional project management support. That's the maintenance side of Public Works. And then last but certainly not least, we do have an Environmental Services Division. The first column there, Sea Level Rise Resiliency Study. We issued an RFP. Responses were due, I believe, at the end of February. We'll be interviewing some proposers soon, and we hope to have a recommendation to the council later this spring. And this would be the city's first ever sea level rise resiliency plan, so that we begin to address climate change. Second item, CAP, Climate Action Plan. That is in need of an update. Council approved that contract, and we're beginning that process. We'll continue implementing continued diversion programs. We obviously want to divert as much as we can from landfills and put that in the recycling stream. We'll continue to work in that regard. Changes on this from the state continue. And we'll continue to address whatever changes that the state throws our way and do what we can to implement those changes. And then, of course, we'll continue to work on our stormwater program in accordance with all applicable permit requirements. So those are the four divisions of Public Works. Perhaps this would be a good point to pause, and I'd be happy to answer any questions that the council may have.
Just a quick update for the environmental. There is some state legislation coming forward that is going to change some of the requirements of SB 1383 which has been significantly onerous on cities. So we're hopeful that if that gets passed at the state level, it'll make it less of a burdensome to local government. So something to keep an eye on.
Fingers crossed, Your Honor. Thank you for pointing that out. We are mindful of that, and we will continue to monitor that. All right, next department is community development. This consists of 3 divisions: planning, economic development, and community preservation. We'll begin with planning. First column, we're going to go ahead and implement goals, policies, programs of some specific plans. And those are the 2 listed right there, Old Town and Bayside Newark. With respect to Old Town, obviously that's the streetscape improvements. Community development will be working in very close coordination with our engineering team as they're taking the lead on the streetscape plan. I indicated earlier about the truck route study. Community development will be assisting engineering with that as well. And then to the extent that some developers would like to develop in Old Town, we'll be certainly working with them on the entitlement process. As far as Bayside Newark, we're excited about constructing during this biennial budget the 5-acre Grand Park. The design on that is substantially complete, and we hope to have construction begin in this budget cycle. Council did approve FMC Willow. Community development will be working with the developer on that for 270 market rate units and 90 affordable housing units. And construction in there should begin in 2025. Community development is also looking at the new Park Place specific plan mixed use 2 area. So to refresh everyone's recollection, this is the land that's situated outside of the ring road. It's designated for a host of uses: retail, office space, hotel. Last time we did this plan was quite a number of years ago, 2017, 18-ish. And so obviously we've had the pandemic, there's been a change of circumstances. We want to see if those uses still make sense in today's world. Also, we have the Four Corners area plan. This was something that was required under the housing element. We're looking at the Four Corners, Jarvis and Newark Boulevard. We'll be examining that, engaging with our community to see to what extent they would like to see some residential uses out there. And I believe the housing element will have does have a required minimum for housing units over there. Is it 300, I believe? 360. So we'll be looking at that in this budget cycle. Actually, if you could go back, Ms. Lee.
Sorry.
Implement affordable housing work plan. I'm not going to talk too much about that. The council, obviously, we had a lot of reports on that a few months ago. A lot of lofty goals identified in there, and that staff will be implementing those. One of the items that we'll be looking at in May is potentially adding in a housing programs manager to the city's FTE. That could potentially be funded through a variety of sources outside of the city's general fund, i.e. Affordable Housing Fund, Community Development Maintenance Fee Fund. Likely will require some sort of contribution from the city's operating budget. Staff is currently doing that analysis as to what would be the appropriate percentages, but that's what we'll be looking at for potentially including into the city's budget. Obviously, you don't need to tell you that housing is a serious issue. There's a lot of requirements that the housing element has, a lot of programs for us to implement, and we would like to have staff to do that. So that is planning. Economic development, we'd like to attract new businesses, retail, biotech, advanced manufacturing. Just to refresh the council's recollection, a few months ago we had the start of an industrial lands presentation. She's beginning work on her analysis, and we'll have more information in this budget cycle as to where that's at. We want to continue to market Newark to businesses and real estate brokers. As we talked at the last month council meeting, developing some sort of hotel marketing plan so that we can advertise our hotels with the goal of securing additional TOT revenue. And then supporting the Chamber of Commerce and all small businesses. I just like to acknowledge and thank some economic development team members. They've been very, very proactive in our community, supporting our small businesses, and we certainly hope that continues. Last but not least is community preservation, partnering with the community to maintain property standards, achieve compliance through outreach, education, enforcement, and promoting health and safety by enforcing minimum housing and property maintenance standards. The housing element does require that the city commence a rental inspection program. I believe it's in this calendar year, if I'm not mistaken, in 2025. So we're going to begin a piloting program for this year with the understanding that assuming once we figure out all the issues and iron those out, that we can expand in future years. But that's certainly a goal that we'll be working towards in this biennial budget. That wraps up community development. I'd be happy to answer any questions that the council may have with regards to that department.
Colleagues? Councilmember Collazo.
So the question I have is the 360 units of housing in the Four Corners area. Me Pueblo Market?
Yeah, we had discussed that internally. Mr. Turner, if you have any further thoughts on that.
Thank you. Good evening. Councilmember Stephen Turner, Community Development Director. As part of the housing element, the state wanted us to take a look at placing residential units and housing in high opportunity areas of the city. And the Four Corners area was identified as a high opportunity area where incomes are higher, there are services available. And the state, although we didn't put any affordable housing or housing units specifically from the housing element in the Four Corners area, the state wanted us to conduct a study to see about putting residential units somewhere within the Four Corners area. So part of that study, we'll take a look to see where those units could go. They could go on a variety of lots. They wouldn't perhaps, we don't suspect that it would just be on one single lot or take up any take up retail or any other uses. We think that there's probably enough land out there in parking lots and other sort of vacant lots where housing could be proposed. So we'll go through a public process this year to get feedback and then start working on a Four Corners area plan that we can bring back to Planning Commission and Council over the next year.
Thank you.
Just to follow up, Mr. Turner, if I may, we didn't identify that location in our housing element, if I heard you correctly, but the state compelled us to kind of look at that area as an opportunity. So if we were to build residential in that area, would those units go towards our targeted goals?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. And then I do have a follow-up question, Mr. Benoon, on the inspection program. I heard you use the word compel. So we weren't thinking of bringing proactively our own inspection program. The state compelled us to initiate and develop an inspection program?
Oh, no. I think the intent, especially with our new community preservation manager, was to look for more proactive ways where code enforcement and community preservation can be out in the community rather than being reactive. And so having a proactive rental inspection program will allow us to take a look at the housing data, what's in our city, and do some proactive targeted outreach initially through a pilot program where we can go out and do inspections that way. So although the state is encouraging, I think, most jurisdictions who don't have that program to implement it, and I think they just wanted to have the housing element reflect the intentions of the city and put a program in there.
And my apologies for the confusion. I meant to say the housing element requires us to do that. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, good. Thank you.
All right. Financial services. We'll continue to monitor revenues, expenditures, economic trends. Be sure to monitor our fiscal policies. Develop the biennial budget, 5-year forecast. Provide leadership and support in grant compliance and financial reporting. And then last but not least, establish a maintenance reserve. We had discussed at a previous council meeting the city's facilities master plan. Several $75 million in maintenance needs were identified spanning over the next 20 years. We're going to need to establish some sort of reserve to address those maintenance needs in the short-term, medium-term, and long-term future, and we certainly want to be proactive about that. That concludes financial services. Are there any questions with regards to that? All right, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Assistant City Manager Havorka. She'll provide an overview of the remaining departments' strategies and objectives.
Okay, good evening, Mayor Hannon, Vice Mayor Freitas, and council members. First, we will start with Recreation and Community Services. We are very much looking forward to the opening of the city's first resource center that will house social services and community programming. It's a great opportunity also to establish new relationships with local providers to fill service gaps that exist for our residents. And while recreation staff introduced a variety of successful special events and activities this year already, they are actually now and will continue to innovate and bring some awesome new events and programs with a focus on inclusivity in the coming years. And additionally, we will continue our scholarship program to ensure residents, regardless of income, have access to activities that promote healthy lifestyles. Any questions for Recreation and Community Services?
Just to echo Councilmember Collazo's request at the last council meeting, is really to look at the income of our residents in terms of maybe their ability to access recreational services. Because we want to make sure all of our residents have access to those services and they don't become a burden on their families financially. So continue to encourage opportunities to look at helping low-income residents utilize those services.
Yes, of course. Thank you. Okay, next is Human Resources. And HR will focus on attracting a talented workforce with plans to revamp our onboarding process and continue to explore creative ways to showcase Newark as an employer of choice. Retention of our magnificent staff will remain a top priority. We will continue mentoring, coaching, and job shadowing programs, and look to our employee engagement committee and leadership team to promote the city's pride values. That's personal service, resourcefulness, innovation, diversity, and engagement. HR will also increase its focus on employee safety, supporting employee well-being and safety programs, as well as practice proactive case management and identify funded safety measures to lower the risk of general liability for the city. Any questions for Human Resources?
Just on that human resources, we know that we're continuing to try to hire more police officers to be where we need to be in terms of providing the outstanding service to our residents. Where are we in the other departments in terms of vacancies? Are there any other areas in any other department where we are really concerned about the number of vacancies in those departments that may impact our ability to deliver service?
No, actually, I think we're very fortunate that our vacancy rates are fairly low in the other departments. Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, we'll move on to IT, Information Technology. IT staff are very excited about the development of 2 master plans. The Technology Master Plan will be presented at the next City Council meeting and includes a roadmap for technology improvements within city operations. And then a draft of the Broadband Master Plan will be presented to the Council in April. And with many initiatives identified in the Technology Master Plan, IT will support a number of department projects with new or upgraded technology, as well as implement best practices in creating IT policies and governance. Cybersecurity will also remain a top priority as we continue to build on the many proactive measures City Council has supported this past year. Do you have questions on information technology? Okay. Next, we'll go to the City Manager's Office, which includes the offices of the City Clerk, the City Attorney, and Emergency Management. Earlier, we talked about emergency management services focusing on the updated citywide comprehensive emergency management plan. We will also look at increasing participation in the city's community emergency response team, known as CERT. As City Manager Biennial mentioned, that the last update of our comprehensive emergency management plan was in 2013, and it is the city's master document for guiding the city's response to disasters. And a key component of the city's response efforts is our CERT team, a small but mighty group of volunteers with specialized training to supplement first responders during disaster response. And in the coming months, we will ramp up recruiting efforts to increase our CERT membership. Moving on to our City Clerk's office, it is an election year, and our City Clerk will be coordinating with the Alameda County Registrar of Voters to administer the November 5th, 2024 election. In addition, city staff will offer 2 informational workshops prior to the election, one for anyone considering running for Newark City Council, and a second for city council candidates who have decided to run for office and would like an overview of city operations. We are also excited about launching a citywide branding and marketing effort that will include community participation in creating a brand for the city. Goals include a marketing plan to promote our wonderful Newark community to future residents, businesses, and service providers. Along with branding and marketing, staff will focus on expanding our city communication channels in an effort to increase our reach and introduce our messaging to new demographics in the city. Any questions on city manager's office?
My only comment is, again, we have such a diverse community, and we do a great job in this regard, but just to make sure that our communications to our community is in multiple languages so that we're reaching the broadest percentage of our residents on a regular basis, irrespective of what marketing tool it is. Get that message out in multiple languages so everybody has an opportunity to participate.
Thank you.
And we do that now just to kind of reemphasize that.
Yes. Okay, that was the last department priority overview, so we'll move on to next steps. That will include a discussion on April 11th to hear initial feedback from council and the public on the proposed capital improvement plan. Then in May, we will present drafts of both the biennial budget and the capital improvement plan. After incorporating feedback from those presentations in either May or June, we will return with the final biennial budget and capital improvement plan for council's consideration of adoption. And that concludes our presentation this evening. We are happy to receive your feedback and answer any questions you may have.
I don't know, Ms. Harrington, do I need to open it to the public for, yes, thank you. Are there any questions or comments from the public here on this item? Colleagues, any questions, comments?
Very good job.
Yes, just to echo what we said earlier, outstanding work, Mr. Benoon, by you and your staff, and we really appreciate it. Now, I do recognize as we move forward that we have a council meeting that we're now running a little bit behind on, so if I may suggest, we will start the council meeting at 7:30. Otherwise, this work session is closed.
We can see a screen how busy